By now I assume that you've already developed some basic Houdini skills, and so to save us time and to have us focus in on stuff we haven't learned yet, I've gone ahead and done a lot of this work ahead of time. So just to give you a brief tour of what's going on, I have these different 3D scans that I found online, and we have this main terrain section that's scanned in. We have these logs, which represents our campfire. We have this ember bed right here that I made, and we have these campfire stones. So this is where the main portion of our simulation is happening. Also, if we go to our material, I have 3 materials so far: a ground, stones, and logs. These just read in texture maps, so there's really nothing complicated right there. And then I have 2 HDRs going on. I have the HDR for the main lighting portion right here. So this is responsible for all the light in the scene. And then this HDR backdrop is responsible only for the backdrop portion that's not actually casting light, but is just visible in the backdrop. For the render cam, I'm working with a 100mm lens. So we've zoomed in a fair bit right here. And then you can also find where I've built up all this stuff. This is the rocky ground. I've cached it out to a BGO file, cleaned up all the attributes. So it's just a very simple geometry right here. I've also made this selection over here, which isolates where the embers are placed. And that will come in handy for the SimGeo, because I've also set up the collision volumes that we're going to eventually use with the flames. And that collision volume stuff is exactly as you saw it in Pyro 1. I'm basically just taking an SDF of the stones, logs, and embers, merging that in with that piece of geometry I was just telling you about, the little platform where the embers are lying on. I extrude that out a little bit, merge it all in right here. That turns into a VDB. I bring this in a little bit with the VDB reshape SDF. And if you set this to a road and then change the offset, you can see that it just kind of shrinks in everything, which is going to help us out. It just adds a little bit of extra padding. And that's about it. The first thing we really need to do here is take a look at the embers and the logs and figure out how we want to begin sourcing these volumes. Just like Pyro 1, I like to use a shelf to get us started, because that's going to create a bunch of nodes and just set up all the tedious stuff for us ahead of time. You don't have to use a shelf. Again, I think it's convenient, so we're going to do that. And also be sure that the render flag is set to this merge down here, so that when you use the shelf tool, it's looking at the logs and the embers. We'll say flames, and this will create our AutoDOP and our Pyro imports. And this looks just like you saw it in Pyro 1. The Pyro Sim starts off with a bunch of points that gets scattered along the surface right here. We break up the values on the attributes on these points with this attribute noise. That gets rasterized into VDBs. Then it gets sent out to our DOP network. Our volume source is picking up temperature and fuel right now. Those are the 2 main attributes that I'll talk about here in a minute. And then it populates the smoke object with all the fields that it needs. So there's our smoke object. That all gets sent to this Pyro imports, where we now brought in the fields with this DOP.io. And we have density, velocity, temperature, heat, and fuel. We don't need all that for rendering, but you can use all this for rendering, and more on that later. Let's get rid of this import Pyro visualization though, because we don't really need that. And let's do one more pass over everything just to get a basic setup going on. So back to our source. We start with this Pyro source where we're creating the fuel. Eventually we're going to paint on our points, and we're not going to rely on what we've scattered right here. But I do want to actually just take this scale here, which right now is 1.9, and set that to 1. This will help us keep track of the actual values going into our Pyro simulation over time. We can always scale this within our source. So I like keeping that at 1. For this noise, let's deal with that again here in a minute. And then with the rasterize, I'm going to get rid of some of these attributes that we don't need. So density, We don't need CD, don't need alpha or V. We just need temperature and fuel. On our smoke object, let's also change this to max axis right there. Let's set this to 100, something pretty small, and then change our bounds like this so that we're only focusing in on a small portion of this flame. That will let us have something like 100 divisions and still have enough resolution to generally see what's happening. Also, let's bring in our static object so that we have something to collide with. So static object, set that up. We're going to bring that in like so, and then let's go to our SOP path. We'll go to our, where is it? Campfire Geo, no, not that. Pyrosim Geo, there we go. From here, we want our collision VDBs out, right there. Let's just copy this, set that down under the collisions tab to the proxy volume, turn off display geometry, turn on collision guide, and this time we will use volume sample. And let's see what we have right here. So right away, you know, this is too much. I think that we could probably get away with less resolution than this. Let's go back here and then we just turn this down. I'm also going to give us another tab to work with so that we can jump back and forth. So let's do that. And then like I said before, we have too much resolution going on. Let's bring this up to maybe 0.005 and see if that works better for us. Okay, so it might be too coarse, probably is too coarse. Let's bring this maybe 0.004. And I think that is generally what we're after right there. Okay, we can change that later if we want, but good enough for now. Turn off collision guide, and we have a collision happening. Also, let's go to our Pyro imports, create a file cache. We want to cache this out eventually, so might as well just get this tedious stuff out of the way. Pyrosim, we'll say $OS, F4 BGO SC, and let's just do that. There we go. For our frame rates, I'm going to change it because I'm recording at 30 frames per second. So I'm at 30 frames, but feel free to do this at 24 if you'd like. And that's what that's going to be about. And then I think that's about it as far as the basic setup goes. In the next video, let's take a look at how to source in these volumes. We're going to dial this in and talk about what it is we're trying to achieve with the source and go from there.